Any others? All right. If there's not any others, as I said, we're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We're going to be in verses 4 through 8 tonight. Tonight we are starting our new topic series on marriage problems. And as I've told you, our series generally we try to group 3 topics together that all sort of go together. And we're going to look at marriage problems, then divorce, and then remarriage. And obviously not all marriage problems lead to divorce, but we're going to talk about some different aspects of marriage problems tonight. A couple years ago, we were preparing for a revival service at our last church at North Catawba, and our speaker that week was Rick Krause. My pastor from Dry Ponds growing up. I know many of you, some of you had him at Berea, and some of you know him through other outlets and stuff. But Rick was there, and we were, in true Southern Baptist fashion, we were eating before the meal. You always feed the revival speaker. And so we were sitting in the fellowship hall eating before, and, it was, Misty was working late, and his wife Sandy wasn't able to be there. And so it was me and Drew and Cooper and Rick, and then, several ladies from the church just, waiting to put more on your plate, so to speak. And so we were sitting there eating and talking, and Rick told Cooper, he said, do you know about the 3 rings of marriage? And I can't wear my wedding ring right now. My hand's still swollen from my surgery. But he said, do you know about the 3 rings of marriage? And he said, and, Drew and Cooper are like, no, what are you talking about? They're much younger than they are now. And he said, yeah. He said, the 3 rings of marriage, there's the engagement ring, there's the wedding ring, and then there's the suffer ring. And my boys, they just thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And, unfortunately, a lot of times that's people's view of marriage sometimes, especially if they've not had a good marriage, is that, there is the engagement and the wedding ring and then a whole lot of suffering. But nevertheless, as much as we joke about that, marriage problems can obviously make for a very difficult marriage. And it's just the reality of the situation. But when I do marriage counseling like I did with Dylan and Janet and with others over the years, one of the things that I always tell them is that marriage is one of the hardest jobs you will have in life. It doesn't matter what you do to make a living or to provide for your family, but marriage is the second hardest job you'll ever have in life, and raising kids is the first, because although your spouse doesn't come with an owner's manual, those kids really don't come with an owner's manual. And so, you're doing OJT every day as a parent, learning how to deal with different problems and all that sort of stuff. But marriage is difficult. And I say it's difficult not in that it is this major time of difficulty, but being married is challenging. I think maybe is a better term than difficult. It's just challenging because you have these 2 broken, sinful people trying to live together in harmony and unity and build a life together. And, with the differing opinions, with the differing perspectives on life and everything else that pours into it, it makes for a very challenging existence at times. There's a person who, Helen Rowland, who quoted another person, Robert Keeler, out of a book that said, marriage is like twirling a baton, turning handsprings, or eating with chopsticks. It looks easy until you try it. And, you watch somebody, use chopsticks, and you're like, man, that's like holding a pencil. That ought to be pretty easy. And then you pick it up, and if you're like me, you just end up stabbing the chicken with it to eat. It's not as easy as it looks. And marriage is like that, too. You can look at people, grandma and grandpa who's been married together, married for 50, 60, 70 years, and think, oh, well, they make it look easy. Well, it's not as easy as we think it is. And, it is at times challenging, but, the way we handle problems has a lot to do with how those problems can be dealt with. or how we respond to those problems, I guess. One of the things that we have tried to teach our boys over the years is that a lot of the way situations in your life go depends a lot on how you respond to them. If somebody is, if you don't respond well, you get mad, get amped up, and get, angry in a hurry, then you're not going to handle whatever situation very well. You're not going to handle it well. And so it's all about how you respond to the situation. And so, when we really think about marriage problems, I wanted to sort of, do like we do a lot of times on Wednesday night. I wanted to sort of, get audience participation. And so I want you to tell me your biggest marriage problems. No, it's a joke. See if you're still awake. But no, I wanted to ask you what are some things in life or even in our marriages that can cause, that we know of that cause problems in marriage, okay? And so I'm going to take the easy one for you, and that's finances, okay? And we'll make you work for your answers tonight. Finances, a lot of times, will cause problems in marriage because either you don't have enough, you got more month than money, or you have more than enough money and it causes a whole nother set of problems. And so, money can definitely, and finances can definitely be something that causes problems in marriage. What are some other things that cause problems in marriage? Work schedule. Yeah, if one is working first shift and one's working third shift, there's almost no time to really connect. Been there and done that. All right. So crazy work schedules. What else? Communication or lack of. Or maybe the way you try to communicate can definitely cause problems, because if you have one person in the marriage who is sort of quiet and reserved and the other is loud and I don't want to say aggressive, but just, overbearing in their communication style, then that can cause different problems. But one of the things I tell the couples that I do counseling with for premarital counseling, communication or a lack of it can be a nail in the coffin of a relationship, because if you don't have communication, then you don't have a relationship. I mean, that's the the end point of it. I use the example a lot of times. I went and asked Misty out when we were almost 17 years old, and if we'd went out on that first date and then I never called her again and never harassed her, never called her again and never went out on another date with her, never talked with her anymore, would I have a relationship with her here 24, 25 years later? No, I wouldn't. And so communication is key. It's what relationships are built off of, and the way we handle our problems in the area of communication at times can be good or bad. So what else? Discipline children, okay. That can definitely, are you implying that as in some may not want to discipline their kids and the other would want to, or? Okay, yeah. That can definitely, if the parents need to be on the same page when it comes to disciplining children, definitely. What else? Coming from different backgrounds? Yep. The culture, the family culture that you come from can cause problems, because if you're, no offense to the only children if there are any in the room, but only children do not have the same group dynamic that you have if you have one of 9 or even one of 3 like I was. The way you relate to people is a little different, not in a bad way, it's just different, and that can cause difficulty, because I'm not saying this is how only children always are, but I'm just saying I've known one or two like this. If you're an only child, you're sometimes used to getting your own way, because you don't have to work against anybody else to, you don't have to fight for them extra biscuits at the table, so to speak, like some of us had to growing up. And so if you go into marriage, and whether you're the husband or the wife and you were that only child that maybe was pampered, spoiled, whatever you want to call it, then you go into marriage and you're not used to, what would you call it, having to work towards, mediating stuff, then you might run into a little bit of challenge. It might cause problems, whether it's one of 9 or one of 1. So what else? What are some other things that cause problems in marriage? Your parents or your in-laws, they definitely can. Sometimes the best thing for parents and in-laws to do is just get out of the way and let do what? Yeah, sometimes they don't though. So what else? Is Laura back there trying to scroll through her list? And no. What else? What else can cause problems in marriage? Deciding where to go eat. Yes. Yeah. Well, I have no idea. This is supposed to help you with marriage problems, not cause marriage problems. Come on, guys. And you said what? Jealousy, definitely. That can cause problems in marriage for sure. Do what? It all depends on who's in charge. Okay. What else? Right. Well, and that's something that we talk about in our premarital counseling that I do, is that, we all go into marriage with certain expectations that this is going to be the way it is, or whatever. And if those goals or expectations are, like you said, unrealistic, then you're going to go in and you're going to be woefully unprepared for marriage. And you're going to look at those things and you're going to feel, inadequate, you're going to feel hurt, and then that's just going to put your marriage in a challenging spot. Anybody else got anything else to think or to mention? That lack of effort, definitely. If one of the spouses just gives up on trying to make the marriage work, or even paying attention to the other, or in a lot of ways, that lack of effort will again can doom the relationship, or even cause problems. Because, sort of like I was saying earlier, marriage is a job. It is something you have to work at. You can't just put it on cruise control and just expect it to just sort of figure itself out. Now, when two lives, as marriage is, when two lives are bonded together in a long-term intimate relationship, there are bound to be problems. And the reason for those problems is the fact that you have two different people trying to live together, and those people are going to come from different backgrounds. They're going to come from different viewpoints. Then you throw on top of that the fact that God has wired us as men and women completely differently. And even though we're complementary to each other, we are wired completely different, because the way God has wired our ladies is generally more to relate in an emotional and relational way, where men are a lot of times more logical and cut and dry type when it comes to the way they relate to things. And so because those two forms of relation or relating sort of butt heads, it makes it more challenging. And so you've got that on top of the way we are wired and the way we are created, and then our own backgrounds. If we come from a difficult, hard scrabble type life, or have a rather charmed, spoiled life, and then we come together, then all of a sudden, there's plenty of challenges that go on there. And so, we think about this. There's plenty of opportunity for problems in marriage, whether we've been married for a week, well, not even a week, half a week, or whether we've been married for 60 years. And so anywhere in between, less than 6 days to 60 years, anywhere in between, there are plenty of opportunities for marriage problems to creep up. And the foundation for a strong marriage is really the fact for both spouses to have a relationship with Christ. As a pastor, I will not do a marriage ceremony for a Christian and a non-Christian. That's my two requirements to do marriage is, one, we're going to do premarital counseling, and the second one is they both have to either be Christians or they both have to not be Christians. And the reason for that is, the scriptures are very clear not to be unequally yoked. And so if both are starting off with that relationship with Christ, then, the hope is that if that's the case, then they're both going to have a different view of their spouse based on that relationship with Christ. That they're going to naturally want to exude the love and the grace and the peace and the, model their life after Christ. And in doing so, that means they're going to treat their spouse in a particular way. And if their spouse has a relationship with Christ, then they are naturally going to exude that love and peace and grace and those characteristics as well. And so, God's Word compares the union of a husband and a wife to that eternal relationship between Christ and the church. We see that in Ephesians chapter 5, and I know that we're familiar with that. And really, that's what it ought to be mirrored after, is the way we treat our spouse should be representative of the way that Christ treats the church. And so we're going to get into 1 Corinthians 13 tonight, and I want you to look with me there in verses 4 through 8, and I'm going to be reading from the New King James Version. It says, "Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away." And so right here, this particular set of scripture is one that we a lot of times hear read at weddings and mentioned anytime you talk about, a lot of times when you talk about marriage and things like that. But when we think about what the scriptures tell us about love, there's that love that we get that sort of false notion of by, you watch TV or you watch a movie or you read a book or something like that, and you're going to have, you're going to get this one picture of love. And generally what the scriptures say love is all about is not what is generally portrayed through television or movies and books and things like that. But the scriptures tell us what love really ought to be like. It should really be a godly type of love. And when you look at these things that are mentioned in 1 Corinthians 13, these are some good characteristics of love. And if you think about these are the type of things that are characteristic of the love that God shows us. Because, his love suffers long, or is what? Patient, right? His love is patient with us. He's patient with us, and not only that, it's kind. And, it talks about how love does not envy. Somebody mentioned jealousy earlier, I think, when we were talking about one of the things that causes problems in marriage. And that's jealousy or envy. But, love, a love for our spouse is not going to cause us to envy. Love does not parade itself, does not puff up, and, does not behave rudely. If you think about it, how many of us have ever treated our spouse rudely, even if just for a moment? It's not very indicative of the type of love that we ought to show. It says does not seek its own. It's not greedy. It's not, self-serving, so to speak. That love is, if you think about it, love is really not about seeking its own, but it's instead seeking to care for the other. And so when we think about what love can do, we see that it's also not provoked and thinks no evil, or anything like that. But then it goes on to say that it does not rejoice in iniquity. I mean, if you think about it, that would be sort of the idea of something, being in an argument with your spouse over something, having one of these marriage problems, and then them doing something that, they drop their phone, or they do something unfortunate or bad happens to them. And, this says right here that does not rejoice in iniquity, or in that case, sin, and then for us to be happy about it. We're in this argument, we're fighting and carrying on one thing another, and then love is not going to be all of a sudden, oh, well, I'm glad something bad happened to you in the midst of this, or because of your sin or something like that, but it rejoices in the truth. Love is going to hold and cling to that truth, and will bear itself out in that. But it says it bears all things, believes all things, and hopes all things, and endures all things, and love never fails. And so when we think about the way that God loves us, and we think about the way that he shows his love to us through these characteristics, ultimately, that's how we should treat our spouse. That's how our love for our spouse should be played out, and how it should be lived out in everything that we do. Now, I've got a story for you that I want to share from one of my favorite commentary writers, Warren Wiersbe. He shares a story about John Wesley. You know who John Wesley is? The founder of the Methodist Church back 400 years ago. And it says, while crossing a bridge in London, John Wesley stumbled and sprained his ankle. Some friends carried him to the house of Mrs. Mary Vazil on Threadneedle Street, and she was a widow with several children. She cared for John Wesley, and his response to her concern was to ask her to marry him. If we were writing fiction, we might say that the sprained ankle was God's providential way to bring those people together. But the marriage was a disaster. And trust me, as I read this, you always say, yeah, that's a disaster. It says that it was actually so bad that Mary finally left John. Had Wesley consulted with his brother Charles, you may have sang, a lot of the hymns that Charles Wesley wrote. We still sing them today. But his brother Charles, if he'd asked him or asked others to pray for him, he might have avoided that unfortunate situation. Mary was accustomed to her quiet home, and it was difficult for her to travel with her husband and stay in uncomfortable inns or hotels. It is unfortunate that Mary was not content just to ignore John's ministry. She actually opposed it, saying that she gave certain personal letters to his enemies and even made additions to them that made them worse. Once she even pulled her husband around on the floor by his hair. And this is what one of John Wesley's friends said, I felt as though I could have knocked the soul out of her. Wow. Wesley concluded that his unhappy marriage encouraged him to work harder and not complain about missing the comforts of a home. And certainly it encouraged him to be away from home more. You just think, that is a disaster, to say the least. But, marriage problems can definitely lead to that sort of stuff. But, we're talking about this idea of love and respect. And in that example, there was no love and there was definitely no respect for that situation. But, love, as we're talking about it, we talked about what 1 Corinthians 13 says about it. Love is much more than just warm feelings. It's much more than the butterflies in the stomach that we see portrayed on television or in movies and things like that. And regardless of how you may feel toward your spouse at a given moment, God calls us to practice the godly love that is described in those verses. We joke at times that that we love our spouse, but we may just not like them in that moment. It's just one of the that's one of them jokes that we make, and sometimes that may be the truth. That I love you, but you know what? We just don't like each other right in this moment because of whatever the problem might be. But when we think about the love that is described for us in 1 Corinthians 13. That's the type of love, regardless of how we feel towards our spouse in the moment, that's the type of love that we're still supposed to show. It's the type of love that we're supposed to make manifest through our life and through our actions and through the way we speak to them, through the way we talk to them, through the way that we interact with them, even in the midst of problems. And think about it. In a marriage, and I realize that it does take two to make a marriage work. Obviously, if somebody had mentioned earlier that, when we're talking about marriage problems, a lack of effort, I think is what Dylan had mentioned. If there is a lack of effort on even just one side of a marriage, then there's not a lot of hope for a future, because one has already disconnected, one has already unplugged from the marriage if you're not making an effort and not putting forth the effort. But what we know is that even if just one of the marriage partners, even if just one of the spouses chooses to model this kind of love that we read about in 1 Corinthians 13, then that marriage can be transformed. Now think about if both parties in the marriage seek to live out that kind of love and show that kind of grace and try to live out that kind of love, then you can hardly fathom what kind of marriage you could have. Now, a good marriage also, as we've been talking about tonight, this love and respect, a good marriage requires respect, a mutual respect as well, because, respect means that each partner accepts the other as he or she is. And, that's what, we're going to respect who that person is, and we're going to respect who they are inside of the marriage, and not trying to manipulate them, not trying to fix them, not trying to change them. You've heard, I don't know if, I hope you maybe have heard of this term before, but where people do missional dating, where, it'll be a person who is not a Christian, and they're going to go date someone who's not, in the hopes of, or not intentionally, but, they're dating someone, they find out they're not a Christian, and they think, well, I'm just going to stick out in the relationship, and hopefully I can lead them to Christ. And and then things will be all the better for us. They're trying to change them. They're trying to fix them, and that sort of thing. And that can even advance into marriage in that regard, trying to continue to do that, trying to fix them in that regard. But if the goal here, if we respect the person that we're married to, is not trying to manipulate them or trying to change them into who we think they need to be, but ultimately us as the partner in that marriage, we ought to be unselfishly nurturing our partner in such a way that they are developing into who God has designed them to be and who God wants them to be. That should be our goal. I'm going to keep going back to the premarital counseling that I do, because so much of it is sort of mentioned in this series that we're doing. But one of the things that we talk about when we're talking about needs and things that those needs that we have in our life, meeting needs in marriage and things like that. One of the things that we talk about is this hierarchy that a guy with a whole lot more degrees than I have on his wall said at one point, that there were basically five needs that every person, regardless of where you live on the globe, regardless of when you've lived, you have five certain needs that everybody has. One is shelter, food, water, all that stuff, security, and one thing and another. But the top one is what he calls self-actualization needs. And what that is, the way I explain it to the couples that I'm marrying, well, at least the ones that are not young enough to be my kids now, but ones in the past, I've said, you remember the old Army slogan? I know you guys will. I think I mentioned it to Janet and Dylan. They're like, I have no clue what you're talking about. But you remember the old Army slogan, "Be all you can be," back from years ago? Well, it's that. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, I'm just making sure. You're on that upper fringe there, just checking. But you remember that slogan, "Be all you can be." Well, that self-actualization need is that. It's us trying to help our spouse be all they can be. And ultimately that's in what God wants them to be, not what we want them to be. And so that's what this level of respect is, us helping them achieve that self-actualization need that they have, and us helping them accomplish that. Respect, though, distinguishes between the ideal, what we think it is, and the real. I mean, that's what respect is going to ultimately bring out. Because what we'll see is that we have this ideal of who we want them to be and what we want them to accomplish, where ultimately it's, who they are and what they are trying to accomplish as a person, and us trying to help them with that. But Ephesians 5:33, this is where we'll end up tonight. It says, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. And ultimately, it's that love and respect that is ultimately going to cause our marriage to, when we have those marriage problems creep up, that love and respect, if we are, even in the midst of a disagreement, even in the midst of an argument or whatever you want to call it, if we are being respectful and loving towards our spouse, even if we're sort of red-faced, just upset or whatever it is, that love and respect is going to go a long ways towards helping us resolve those marriage problems in a godly way, in a way that's going to ultimately bring about a solution to the problem rather than continuing the problem and it just being more and more of a problem for us. And so that's the end of tonight's study. And next week we'll be looking at the genuine commitment that is involved in marriage and the problems that can come along in that regard. And then we'll talk about time and effort and how those play into helping us resolve marriage problems. We'll also talk about the problem of pride, because even though we're married doesn't mean we're immune to the problems of pride. And then the last one that we have comes from Proverbs 12, and I didn't come up with the name of the study or the name of the night's title, but this one says, "Don't be a fool." And so take that however you want. But Proverbs 12 will be where we'll be at in that one. And so I want to thank you for being here tonight and being here for our study, and I hope that it didn't cause too many problems for any of us. But I'm open for counseling anytime. But no, glad to have you with us tonight. And we'll be back together on Sunday morning. We're going to be looking in our series on the doctrines. We're going to be looking at the scriptures on Sunday. We're going to be looking at the Bible, and so we'll be looking sort of at what its message is and what its use is in our life. And so we'll be talking about some of that stuff on Sunday morning. Sunday night, we'll be starting into chapter 2 of Revelation. So if you're reading in the commentary, the Black Book, read about the first two churches, Ephesus and Smyrna, I believe it is. And so just read about those two, and because we're going to do 2 this week, 3 the next week, and 2 the next week to get through the 7 churches. And so that's the direction we're headed. Has anybody learned anything new in our study on Revelation? Terry has. Okay, Terry, you come back next week, and no, I'm just picking. But I hope that you are learning some things that you haven't learned before about the book of Revelation, because as we progress through it, it's definitely going to pick up speed and pick up steam, so to speak, and we're going to definitely be seeing some stuff that just sounds completely crazy, but it is what is coming down the pipe to us if we don't believe in Christ. And so we'll look at some of that stuff in the weeks to come. And so with that being said, we'll consider ourselves done. I'll close this with prayer, and